Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Meet the Visionaries podcast, hosted by MIT Center for Real Estate. My name is Tang, and I have my fellow classmate, Isabelle Turri, joining me today. We are first-year students in the Master of Science of Real Estate Development program at MIT. We're very pleased to welcome today's guest, David Blumenfeld. David is a co-founder of NextRivet, a hands-on PropTech advisory firm that helps brick-and-mortar real estate, retail, and mixed-use businesses navigate and execute digital transformation.
Real estate often feels like a sleep giant at the tech revolution party. It's slower to find in Richmond because of so many stakeholders and moving parts, yet all more fascinating to transform. Our guest today, David Blumenfeld, doesn't just believe this giant can move. He's making it move. At NextRivet, David's mission is not just to advise, but to roll up his sleeves and demystify PropTech, bridging the gap between digital ideas and real-world deployments. Ensure that innovation isn't just theoretical, but applicable.
In our conversation today, we'll explore how David sees the future of PropTech, how AI and digital tools are reshaping physical spaces, and what it really takes to bring transformational ideas into the built world. David, thank you for being on the podcast today with us.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, before we jump into the tech talk today, I'd like you to take us back to the very beginning and walk us through your journey in digital transformation. So, David, your career brought you to San Francisco, surround all the tech world. How did you first find your way into real estate environment?
I came to San Francisco right out of college, kind of really to date myself, really when the dot-com boom was starting to happen. So obviously an exciting time here in San Francisco. And actually started my career on the media and advertising side, working on behalf of technology clients, including Microsoft, among others, which really got me excited about kind of that tech world. And like I said, there was obviously a lot going on here in the Bay Area at the time. Made my way up through different digital and technology companies. And ultimately, after being at a kind of a location-based startup, digital advertising and media startup, had an opportunity it kind of came out of the blue to join Westfield in a group called Westfield Labs, which was essentially really a kind of pioneered effort in the industry at the time to create kind of how do you bring digital and technology into the physical environment. And Westfield was really pioneering that in not just assigning one or two people in the organization, but actually bringing an entire group in from outside the company to really form labs and figure out what does it mean to essentially create a digital layer in the physical environment. And that's really how I got into real estate. And so since 2012, have been at that intersection of digital and physical, specifically with, as you mentioned, within retail real estate, and then expanding into multifamily and office as well.
Just from your Westfield Lab experience, how did that prepare you for launching a new company? And was there any personal characteristics or strength that you think you already have that helped you through, I guess, the process of founding a new company?
Well, other than just being old and experienced, I think you learn a lot of things along the way. Certainly, there's plenty of people, and certainly a lot of folks at MIT would jump out and start a company right away. And I think there's certainly no one way to go about it. I kind of came up in my career through a lot of different experiences, and I think that one helped give me a lot of different lenses on what I could do, but also just gave me the confidence, quite frankly, to feel like, okay, maybe I get beyond the imposter syndrome and actually feel like I know what I'm doing here to start my own company. I think the genesis really for NextRivet, my company now, was, because we're in San Francisco in the Bay Area, obviously like through the dot-com boom, through all the booms, and now obviously the AI boom. But we had this unique division within the real estate industry in Westfield Labs, and there were a lot of real estate companies, both domestic and international, who would come through the Bay Area kind of on their innovation tech tours. Their executive teams would come through wanting to meet with Google and Facebook and Twitter at the time, all the kind of known big names, and then realized that, hey, there's a group in San Francisco that's not just doing tech, but doing tech in our industry. And so we would meet and essentially host these groups that would come through on these tours. And over the course of time, probably met with over 100 different companies. And myself and my business partner, Kyle Spencer, were usually the ones presenting to these groups. And we were fairly open book about what we were working on. And honestly, more often than not, at the end of these meetings, these execs would huddle and then turn to us and say, hey, do you think you guys can help us out too? And we'd have to kind of politely decline and say, sorry, we work for Westfield, but it kind of established this kernel of an idea that said, hey, there's a lot of demand for expertise in this area. A lot of companies are not willing to kind of put in the investment, certainly that we did at Westfield in creating a group that was over 50 people. And so, this was always in the back of our minds that, hey, there's an opportunity here to potentially do this and really make this a business. And so Westfield was acquired in around 2018 by a French mall operator, Unibail Ramco. We stayed on for a bit, but ultimately decided to go for it and spin ourselves out in 2019 to start the business. Obviously, not unbeknownst to us, we were starting the business right for the pandemic, but we managed to navigate that, and here we are today, 6 years later.
Very interesting, David. Could you put more color on what NextRivet does?
So as you mentioned in your intro, we're a prop tech consulting firm, and our ethos, like said, we see a lot of good ideas in the space, but we don't see a lot of practical expertise around being able to take ideas from the PowerPoint and actually put them into action. And I would say that's really our core wheelhouse is how do we actually get these things moving and get them launched and live. And so I think you get, I think a lot of traditional consulting comes in with these amazing 200-page PowerPoints. They plop them on your desk. They look beautiful. They have a lot of great information, but they're not necessarily actionable in terms of then saying, okay, how do I now go from all these great ideas and actually, incorporate them within my organization and then get them live. And so we're focused on it, working with teams. And a lot of times we really feel like we're an extension of the teams that we work with, because we're not there to do things off in a silo. It's really about how do we not only kind of, integrate ourselves within the organization, but also cross-train folks there so that they're getting the benefit of the expertise as well. And then it's really about looking at, okay, what are the, whether you call it digital transformation or your technical roadmap, really looking at what are the things you should be doing across the board and trying to put some planning into that. So it's not just a one-off situation every single time. And then look at, okay, how do we gather the right requirements? Because I think a lot of times one of the major pitfalls we see with real estate companies, or really any company, where they get enamored with one solution or one vendor, and they haven't taken the time to do the kind of the hard yards, so to speak, in terms of gathering what the organization really needs. And then they select that vendor. The vendor comes in, and because the expectations haven't been set, the requirements haven't been gathered, you then have this misalignment in terms of what the vendor's providing versus what the expectations are internally. And then the project goes nowhere, or people are unhappy with it once it happens. And so it's really about making sure you do that hard work behind the scenes to then get to the point where, okay, now we're going to run a technology or vendor selection process. Certainly sometimes there's maybe a build versus buy decision. In most cases, we recommend that there's a buy situation, simply because if you're looking for a specific solution, if you build it all internally, the second you launch it, it's not launched and live, right? It's launched, and you always have to iterate. So you have, if you're working with a technology vendor, they're always improving the product over time. If you build it yourself, you have to be committed to having those same resources, not just to launch it, but also to iterate on it. And that's where we also see some gaps. But ultimately, running a vendor selection process, and then once those vendor or vendors are selected, managing those all the way through launch. And so a lot of times we act as, in some ways, a Rosetta Stone between the business organization and the technology vendors to make sure that the requirements are being met, to make sure the vendor doesn't kind of overwhelm the business with tech talk and tech speak and delay a project simply because they can kind of overwhelm them with jargon. And so we, making sure ultimately the trains come in on time, so to speak.
So what's your secret to cutting through the hype and spotting technologies that truly change the game?
So I think it's a combination of having the experience in doing this for a long time. My role at Westfield, I ran business and corporate development. Most of the technology, we were a 50, 60 person organization, but we were doing everything from front end consumer facing or shopper facing technologies to back end, back of house operations, building management, et cetera. And so we had kind of, a broad swath of experience across all these different types of technologies. My primary job was to go out and find the companies we should be working with and get them under contract. I always joke my business partner had the much harder job of actually operationalizing all that within the organization and educating a lot of executives on who weren't very familiar with technology on what the heck they're spending money on in the first place. So I think you just get experience in some ways, like as you vet these companies. We didn't have a formal investment fund. We also invested in a few companies as well, and so you get a sense for the art and the science of it, right? In terms of, everything from the company background to really what they're showing you from a demo perspective to what the underpinnings of their technology are, to the founder's background, et cetera. Then it's your job, or her job, I should say, to like, as you mentioned, to demystify this for clients. Because if you go in talking about the tech and the stuff and the bells and whistles and the features, you're going to lose people really quickly. And so you just have to learn how to break it down. I think we do a really good job of breaking it down into bite-sized chunks, so that people understand what they're buying. And the key thing too is not to try to boil the ocean, especially out of the gate. I think where a lot of companies get overwhelmed is they're like, okay, I've got to do all this stuff. And I think you're certainly seeing that with AI right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's about getting started. We just try to instill this kind of practical, methodical approach, even when things are obviously changing so fast.
I guess just a follow-up question to what you just said about getting started, even if it's just like one technology implementation. Like if you were to recommend to a very traditional real estate developer who is building a shopping mall project, like a mixed-use project, what would be one technology you recommend them to implement from day one?
What's interesting in the trends and the technology or the things that people have been interested over the last 10 to 15 years. I think when we started at Labs, it was very much like, Amazon's, online shopping's happening and Amazon's eating the world, and people are moving away from physical real estate. And so there was this kind of, how do we essentially kind of create this digital layer and really, weave in digital technologies and digital experiences into the physical shopping experience so that people want to come and shop in the mall. I think some of that's the pendulum has kind of swung back to where you definitely have digital experiences. You have social media driving people to the mall, et cetera. But there's, people still want physical experiences, especially after the pandemic. And so I think where we're seeing a lot more kind of emphasis right now, and certainly with AI included in that, is on kind of the back end or back office, kind of behind the scenes. So the stuff that's not as sexy, certainly to the average consumer, but things that are really moving the needle from an ROI perspective. So whether that's something as simple as a leasing platform and leveraging things to be more efficient in your leasing efforts, and AI has certainly accelerated things along those lines, which I could dig into if you want. Building management operations, making your buildings more energy efficient and doing that in an automated way. Again, an example of kind of making this more pragmatic, I kind of think is building management systems. It's kind of like the Google, just like you have the Google Nest for your house and your thermostat. Now having those kind of intelligence capabilities from a building wide perspective, heating, lighting, HVAC, et cetera. Whether you're looking at spatial analytics, that's, whether it's video cameras, with a lot of computing power kind of at the edge of that edge of those systems now, where you're not requiring these big on-site servers, et cetera, where you're understanding traffic patterns in the center, understanding where people are going, so you can actually look at how your tenants are performing relative to each other, what the tenant mix looks like, where people are going operationally. Can we start to do things more efficiently? So if we see, again, basic example, we clean the restrooms, every 3 hours. Now you can say, okay, now we're, automatically we see 300 people or whatever the count is going to the restrooms, we automatically trigger maintenance. So I think there's a lot of practical applications that are now coming out of all this technology to enable people to do their jobs a lot better and obviously save money along the way.
That's great. Are you able to give us an example of what you're currently working on that's really pushing the boundary of tech implementation in real estate?
Certainly, one of the things that popped up during the pandemic, there was this: how do you enable people to buy and shop the mall when you can't even go there? And so, the buy online, pick up in store became kind of a much bigger thing. And one of the ways that the shopping centers were trying to help this or facilitate this on behalf of retailers, not just putting out designated spots in their parking lot for you to drive up and pick up, but could you actually centralize fulfillment operations so that the unit economics for the retailer would actually be more efficient? Meaning, if you think about, if I send one package out with one driver and that costs $15, if I could send 3 packages out to the same location with the same driver, obviously my unit economics are going to come down on that. And so that's only done by aggregating these packages or these orders across multiple retailers. And so we've been working on a project in the Middle East for a client doing a ground up build, which is exciting because there's obviously not a lot of new shopping center development, certainly in North America right now. But Dubai, which is more established, or now Saudi Arabia, which is really going crazy as far as this 2030 initiative that they have there. And so we're looking at fulfillment operations, and this is what's fun about it. It's not just a tech and digital project. It's really getting into the ground floor, literally figuring out, can we create this centralized hub to not only make inbound retailer replenishment more efficient in terms of getting goods in on a daily basis, but also then how do you set this up to do outbound fulfillment, same day delivery, curbside pickup, et cetera. And so we're looking at both the space, the operations, as well as then the technology to enable all these things. And in the fulfillment logistics jargon world, it's called a 3PL, which is kind of like a warehouse or distribution center. We're now essentially kind of creating a mini one inside the shopping center, like I said, to do all these different things, both inbound and outbound. We have some other clients doing in countries where it's allowed is starting to actually use things like drones to do those deliveries. We're starting to see a little bit of that in the U.S., but the FAA obviously is more stringent for a lot of good reasons on that. But you're starting to see drone deliveries, certainly with medical supplies and organ donation, things like that. I think, or organ replacement, I should say. But the package delivery is coming, and you're seeing that in countries like Australia and other places too.
Nice. Well, thank you for telling us that. So right now I want to propose an exercise for you. So if you imagine the real estate industry like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and how it is, and you imagine like the artificial intelligence, EOT, or other digital twins, which one of those you think will have the biggest impact in like 5 to 10 years?
Well, as we know, technology moves at a faster pace than the real estate industry. And I always joke that everybody wants to be the first to be second in a lot of industries, but in the real estate industry, everybody wants to be the first to be about 15th or 18th, right? It's an industry of followers, and whether that's in the physical space, you see people. When we're back at Westfield, everybody's talking, well, we're going to go do a mall walk, and they go walk other properties, and from the tech side, that's not as exciting as obviously. But it has given me a lot of appreciation for how people look at the physical world. I think so in the digital space, because it's not going to happen overnight, regardless of how fast the technology is moving. I think that the future is certainly in a lot of industries. This isn't some revolutionary statement, but I think as AI gets woven into a lot of the technologies that people are using now, I should preface that by saying, I look at AI kind of differently, or I again, trying to break this down for people. AI is an ingredient that accelerates the technology you should be using. And I think in the prop tech world, in the real estate world, AI has taken kind of prop tech or technology from a nice to have to a must have. So there's not one real estate client that we're talking to or have talked to that isn't thinking about technology in some way. Like, how do I use AI or use technology in my business to make it more efficient, to improve operations, to improve leasing, et cetera? And I think for the foreseeable future, certainly the next 5 years, that's going to be like I said, it's going to be the back of house stuff, the energy efficiency and the lease administration, operational aspects that are really going to be the things that are implemented. And in some ways, it's what a lot of companies should have been doing for the last 10, 15, 20 years. It's now pushed that to the forefront, to the point where you're seeing a lot of like active adoption, budgets being set aside for this, and teams being formed internally to make this happen.
I guess just based on your experience, you mentioned there's kind of a resistance to adopting technologies in the real estate industry, and we're like lining up to be the 15th company to implement like these technologies. Like, what do you see just based on your experience? What's making real estate operator, asset managers kind of hesitant to adopt these technologies?
Well, sure. So glad you asked the question. It's obviously right into it, but why we exist. But I think the reality is domain expertise, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think, and I'll tell a little story at Westfield. So one of the first projects we worked on, which I still think was one of the coolest things we did, was essentially turning physical storefronts into digital storefronts. Meaning we had looking at empty storefronts, or storefronts that were maybe in between leases, and literally taking the glass on the front of the storefronts and turning them into giant iPads or giant touch screens using rear projection technologies and other things. So you can literally walk up and shop the glass.
Where is that being implemented? That sounds pretty cool.
Well, it's complicated and expensive, and so it hasn't yet to be scalable, but you have some companies certainly working on that. You go to a mall today and you see kind of coming soon, right? For the store, it's usually a poster. I think you're going to see a lot more digital now going forward in that, which is more cost effective. You can change out, et cetera. But in that experience, as we were walking around the space, the shopping centers happened to be in San Francisco, trying to figure out which spaces to use, and we were, this would work here and there here, and walking with the center manager, and they were talking about moving walls like it was not a big deal, right? And so somebody coming out of the digital world, I was like, well, we can just move a wall. And they're like, yeah, of course. It's time and money, but we can do anything in the physical space. In the same way, we realize, just as we think about on the digital side, moving a pixel on a website, like, yeah, we can just change a pixel, we'll move it here, move it there. There was just as much kind of hesitation and for lack of a better term, fear in thinking about that as I had from a physical perspective. And so I think it's really domain expertise. Like moving a wall to them was like moving a pixel for me, and vice versa. So it's really your domain expertise and where your areas of focus are. And I say this a lot when you talk about like building a physical building. You hire an architect to design the building. You hire a contractor to build the building. You can't necessarily ask a bunch of people who have been kind of in real estate management and operations to suddenly understand technology out of the gate. And so while there certainly needs to be an effort internally to make sure you're as educated as possible, you need to also bring in domain experts to do that.
That's totally fair. And I think from, I guess, investor and operator's perspective, I feel like prop tech or technology in real estate in general has just often like struggled to demonstrate a clear ROI. Like you mentioned in that example of like the digitizing the glass outside the retail store, I feel like maybe investors or operators may perceive like this type of installment to be riskier and like struggle to understand like the clear benefit sometimes. How would you convince someone there is value? Well,
I think the shoppable glass is fun. Everybody can kind of relate to that because we all use an iPhone or an iPad or any sort of touch screen. Again, going back to my earlier point, I think the real ROI that's being seen today is on the back end, right? Whether it's people costs or time. I think that's where the real ROI is starting to come into play, and we're just starting to see the actual numbers come out of a lot of those engagements and implementations. But that's where the CFO of an organization is going to get behind this. And like you said, there's some cool bells and whistles, and I think there are, you think back to when I started at Labs in 2012, like, looking at real estate companies, making sure they had websites or maybe an app. Those were kind of new things, but that's now just table stakes things you have to have, right? And so I think there's always going to be the softer stuff that you have to decide is a bell and whistle that we're just going to use to attract people to the building, and we just need to have this, versus what's the hard ROI and payoff. But certainly in what we're seeing right now, it's a lot of that operational back end.
Yeah. Now I think we have some more funny questions for you.
Okay.
So, what is the boldest, crazy idea that you ever heard that you secretly are hoping that will work?
Well, there's a lot of talk about the metaverse in real estate, right? And
Nice.
I think what's, again, another kind of misunderstanding about the metaverse is it's one universe, right? Like that's, basically you're using kind of virtual reality in the physical space. I think augmented reality is definitely an opportunity, right? Which is essentially creating a digital layer in a physical environment with, the glasses, obviously, that Facebook has recently relaunched, or Meta, I should say, where, now thinking about walking down a building and seeing a virtual sign pop out, for example. I think some of that's coming as wearables don't look like you're a total, geek out of the 1980s.
Mhm.
I think some of the metaverse stuff, which is full of virtual reality. And again, I think the misnomer there is it's one, right? Think about I think the analogy I always use is like the different gaming systems or gaming consoles. You have PlayStation, you have Xbox, etc. All these companies are creating their own, different worlds, right? And so when that first happened, all these real estate companies are like, "Ooh, I've got to go buy my property in the metaverse." And I'm like, well, actually, you just bought it in the one over here. You didn't buy it in the other 5 that are being developed over here. And so I still think a lot of that is theoretical, and I'm not sure that's going to come together. But like I said, I think some of the augmented reality stuff is pretty interesting. And it's not just about, creating a game where I have to go find things or other. I think it's going to be more practical, and in terms of whether it's shopping or even just in an office or multifamily residential, like are there things and experiences that I can actually create that augment the physical space. I think augmented reality is much more of a practical approach than maybe the metaverse. And it's not to say the metaverse is never going to exist. I think it's a long way off, and I think it's certainly we tried to steer clients, at least for now, away from thinking about that too much.
Nice. Very interesting answer. Yeah, honestly, I feel like metaverse, the way I think about how it will impact like the physical real estate market, I feel like it's almost like a threat. Like I feel like it's not at the stage where it fully replaces the physical aspect of real estate, but it certainly is, I don't know, could be perceived as a potential like competition to like the physical aspect of like retail, going to a shopping mall or going to like office.
I think again, and I think the pandemic did remind people that we still need that physical human interaction. And, if you look at kind of the numbers around things like shopping centers, and obviously people returning to office, and like there is a return to physical happening. And, there's a lot of very healthy shopping centers out there. There's the office markets are coming back. Multifamily in this country is booming. I think, the reality is, sure, you're going to be able to put up a virtual world, and I'm sure they will exist. But in terms of what people want in mass, I think people are still going to want to go out in public and be physical. And I think, the pandemic in a good way reminded everybody of that.
Mm-hmm. We've seen, like the trends of people coming back to the office, and people wanted to connect physically. So I don't think virtual reality is going to replace the physical aspect of real estate, not in the near term, at least. And I guess I have a question for you, a fun question for you. What was the most unexpected challenge you faced while trying to introduce technology in traditional industries such as real estate?
Well, it's funny. I mean, certainly the story I told you about the touchscreens was probably the most interesting challenge.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing that goes back even before before real estate that I think kind of speaks to change and change management, and also what's happening. What's your question about why has real estate been so slow to move? One of my early jobs, I worked at CNET, which is a technology media company, which is still around. And so we were a technology company. We were writing about technology. We were publishing everything from consumer to enterprise technology information. And at one point, our IT department decided to change email platforms. And the platforms did exactly the same thing. They emailed. You could write an email. You could send an email. You can get an email. And the uproar internally when we changed email platforms was massive. And I've heard this same story across industry. And this is, again, it didn't, and in fact, once people got used to it, it did things better than the previous system. But the amount of just, oh gosh, this is different and I have to learn this. And even though it's like, here's a button here, here's a button here, here's a button here, was massive. And so that's always stuck with me when you think about now, getting leasing people to move away from spreadsheets and actually put their information in a centralized system and be more efficient from a leasing perspective, or operations. Think about the data that they now have access to look at their buildings. You really these are things you have to learn along the way. And I think there's been this kind of idea, this kind of natural apprehension to change, I think works in our daily lives, whether you're talking about technology or not. But certainly in the real estate industry, where you're talking about moving away from very old school methodology into new ways of doing things and incorporating technology, it's scary. And I think that's why you see, so not just because people are like, oh, we don't need it, but the reality is I don't understand it, therefore I'm not going to do anything about it. And again, I think AI has been a nice kind of shove in the back, so to speak, to get people to move in that direction, because there is that kind of again, that resistance to change from a natural perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, David, this has been a very insightful conversation. Thank you for taking the time to take us behind the scenes of your journey from Westfield Lab to NextRivet. I'm sure our audience will walk away with a clearer sense of what's possible and how to start demystifying prop tech in their own work.
It's very exciting to hear how you're helping the industry that often moves very slowly, but can embrace innovation in meaningful, practical ways. So we're going to be watching what you're doing and our team's doing to translate those big ideas into real-world impacts and show us how technology can create more connected, efficient, and engaging places. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a fun conversation.
Thanks to our listeners for tuning into another edition of Meet the Visionaries podcast. And please remember to stay tuned for future episodes by subscribing to our podcast, or follow us on social media by visiting cre.mit.edu to learn more. Until next time, take care, listeners.